The script to Martin Scorsese's The Irishman was written by veteran screenwriter Steven Zallain. The copy of the script I have is one of the earlier drafts, so there's every possibility the ending of the film will be different in the final movie. It goes without saying that this video contains major spoilers. So the ending of the film and its significance has to be taken in context with the rest of the movie to be delivered as powerfully as it is. Now, when you talk about the ending of a film, you could be talking about the final few segments or the very last scene. With The Irishman, I feel the movie has a pretty clear first act, a second act, and a climax. What I consider to be the ending is essentially a fourth act, an elongated conclusion to the film's events. It's quite comparable to Goodfellas in the sense that the movie introduces you into the world of the mob, continues with Henry's adventures in the mafia, and suddenly comes crashing to a stop with Tommy's death. The final half an hour or so are quite drastically different in tone and pacing. As those familiar with the story might expect, The Irishman builds and builds to Jimmy Hoffa's death, where he is executed by Frank Sheeran in a mob hit. This scene is, I guess, what can be considered the climax of the film. After this event occurs, the murderer and protagonist Frank Sheeran, whose life we've been following for the entire film, returns to his boss Russell Bufalino, and they both head to the wedding of one of their associates, Bill Bufalino. There are several things that happen after the death of Hoffa, from Bufalino's wedding to Sheeran phoning Hoffa's wife and offering condolences, to Sheeran's daughter ceasing to talk to him him explaining to us what the mob did with Hoffa's body. It's worth noting that Sheeran wipes away a tear whilst everyone is crying and emotional at Bufalino's wedding, and it isn't because of the marriage. Then the movie essentially provides a "where are they now" breakdown of most of the major characters in the movie associated with Hoffa's death. Through Frank Sheeran's voiceover and numerous flashbacks intercutting with each other, we're shown the likes of Anthony Provenzano being sent to prison for orchestrating a hit, the Andretta brothers doing 20 years for extortion-related activities, Sally Buggs being assassinated by Sheeran for becoming a rat, allegedly, Anthony Salerno getting done on tax crimes and being diagnosed with cancer, and Russell Bufalino and Sheeran himself going down for separate reasons. One of the points of this segment, as well as to cap off the events of the movie, is to show that everyone involved with the Hoffa murder was punished in some way or another, but no one was ever actually charged with the murder itself. In real life, the FBI also mentioned that everyone who could have possibly been involved with the Jimmy Hoffa murder had been punished in some way, citing, "those responsible have not gotten off scot-free." Now begins the movie's final few chapters, the Old Man Sheeran segments. In Sandstone Prison, the likes of Bufalino, Salerno and other elderly inmates in wheelchairs roll bocce balls across the ground in the freezing cold, while Sheeran watches from a distance. Sheeran narrates as part of the voiceover. "Russell's got Parkinson's there. Tony Salerno couldn't control his urine anymore. The arthritis in my hand moved to my back and a neurophy was in my feet. I couldn't feel either one of them. Neurontin helped a little, but it also makes you dingy. If you take it at night, okay, but during the day it makes you forgetful. We were all falling apart and the freezing fucking cold wasn't helping. I needed a cane, but they wouldn't give you a cane in prison since you could use it as a weapon." The scene transitions to another with Frank and Russell eating prosciutto bread like they used to in the old days when they first met, except this time dipping the bread in grape juice instead of wine. They sit in silence until Russell says, "Jimmy was a nice man, nice family. I didn't want it to go that far. I should have protected you some other way. I can't forgive myself for what I did to you." Sheeran says it's alright and acknowledges that Bufalino didn't want Hoffa killed. Russell looks at his shaking hand whilst trying to steady it to dip a piece of bread. "Is this my punishment?" he says. Later, Sheeran, still in prison, comes across Russell in a wheelchair being pushed by another inmate. He asks him where he's going and Russell says, "To church." Frank is bemused and Russell says, "Don't laugh, you'll go too when the time comes." Sheeran watches him go and then his voiceover takes over. "Russell went to church, then he went to the prison hospital in Springfield, then he went to the graveyard." We cut to Buffalino's funeral, and the screenplay makes a point to mention that the amount of people in attendance seems little when taking Buffalino's stature into account. Sheeran's voiceover continues, telling us he was released shortly after Buffalino's death, and then his wife passed away 2 months later. At the funeral, he supports himself with canes. His daughters are all there, all grown up now, and Peggy stands apart from them all, not looking at her father, who tries to catch her attention. Then the movie presents a couple of scenes, one after the other, showcasing the mundane and lonely existence of Frank Sheeran, shuffling around his house on his canes, sitting in front of the TV alone, counting his pills but getting confused and having to start over, and falling in the night and being unable to get up. The movie then cuts to an assisted living facility, suggesting Sheeran checked himself in after being unable to support himself on his own. He sits away from the other men and women who play cards and dominoes, in a wheelchair with his eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses. His gold watch and gold ring, the two gifts from the two men he respected most in life, Hoffa and Buffalino, do not leave him. The script tells us he has been here for months. There's a few more scenes in the facility, such as him engaging in small talk with the nurse and FBI agents asking him questions. Frank is actually happy that they're here, as he doesn't get visitors very much, including his 4 daughters. Frank answers their questions by directing them to his attorney, and the agents inform him that the attorney has already died of cancer. There's clearly a pattern here, with everyone in Sheeran's life either dying or willfully leaving him. The FBI agent says, "Everyone's dead, Mr. Sheeran. But Mr. Hoffa's children aren't. They live with not knowing, and that's hard to do." Sheeran looks for a moment like he's about to talk, until he politely tells them he can't help them. Later, Sheeran on crutches enters a bank looking for his daughter Peggy, who works there. Having not spoken to her father for years, she spots him and puts a closed sign on her window before Frank gets to her. She walks away from the counter and out through a door, with Frank pleading with her to stop, until finally saying, "Peggy, I'm dying," but she does not turn around. Later he takes a taxi to another daughter's house. He asks Dolores to call Peggy and tell her he wants to speak to her, and to tell her that he's sorry for being a bad father, and that he tried his best to protect them all. Dolores asks, "From what?" A reply to which Frank thinks about but isn't sure. Dolores continues, "You have no idea what it was like for us. We couldn't come to you with the problem because of the horrible things you do to fix it for us. You thought you were protecting us, but it was the opposite. We didn't get protected because we were too afraid to go to you for protection. We were protected from nothing, or anyone, ever. You have no idea the things people did to us." He asks, "What did they do to you?" To which she says, "Why? What are you going to do about it? You can't even walk." She looks at him for a few seconds and then says, "You weren't a bad father. You were a nightmare." Later, Frank is in a casket store talking to the salesman. They talk for a while and then the salesman asks, "Is it for a man or a woman?" Sheeran looks at the rows of caskets and replies, "It's for me." Then we come to the movie's very last scene. Frank is in hospital, hooked up to IVs, looking through some photographs. The image of his face switches from film to video camera footage as a camera is turned on, harking back to the way the film started. He's not quite with it, what with all the medication he's on. He talks to a voice. We never see the body of the voice, but those who've read the book the film is based off of, I Heard You Paint Houses, will know that it's author Charles Brandt. This is part of a series of interviews Brandt did over the course of 4 years where he got the details of Sheeran's life to write the book. They speak for a while about a confession that Sheeran went to, with him telling the priest that he had done things that he's not proud of. He also said that he didn't go into details as it's not required. Frank concludes the conversation by saying, "I'm at peace." The camera looks down to the photos. The one at the top is of Russell and Frank. Brandt says, "Are you?" Sheeran looks up at the camera with the same menacing glare he showed at the start of the film in the opening scene. "You're not being clever," he says. "You think you are, but you're not. Be satisfied. You got enough. Don't be probing." They go back and forward a little bit, with Sheeran admitting after Brandt's probing that there's still one thing left to do. He looks at the camera. "Ask me the question." "Do you stand by what you told me?" Brandt asks. "Yeah," Sheeran replies. Everything. Yeah. The war? Yeah. Whispers, the jeweler, Gallo? Yeah. Sally? They deserved it, Sheeran says. All of them. I ain't got no remorse. And none for their families? Brandt asks. I didn't know their families. You knew Jimmy's? Silence. The camera tilts down to the photos. The one at the top now is of Jimmy and Frank at Frank Sheeran's appreciation night. One of the proudest days of his life and a time where Hoffa and he shared one of the closest and most intimate of exchanges. Did I have any choice? Frank asks. I don't know. Did you? If I'd refused, someone else would have done it, and I'd have been dead too. You sure about that? Frank forces himself to look at the photographs, even though it's killing him inside. He stays like that for a while. Then he turns up at the camera. The menace is all gone, and it's replaced by anguish and torment. What kind of a man does what I did to a friend? Silence again. The camera shows no mercy, fully recording Sheeran's guilt and remorse. The morphine takes away Sheeran's physical pain, but not the torment of killing his close friend. Eventually Brandt says, Frank, whatever happens now happens, but you stand a slightly better chance now. Sheeran mutters something to himself in Italian, something Russell used to say. Brandt, understanding, says it in English. It's in God's hands now. The video footage ends and we go back to normal film, with Brandt, who we still never see, begins gathering his items ready to leave. Frank reminds him to leave the door open a little and exchanges pleasantries before Brandt leaves. I'll see you later, Brandt says. I'm not going anywhere, Frank replies. The last few lines of the screenplay say, From outside the room, the door starts to close, but stops just short of covering up our view of Frank in the room. We can just make him out, in the silver of light between the edge of the door and the frame, sitting alone in his wheelchair. And that is the end of the movie. In my opinion, it's very powerful and a magnificent way to cap off the events of the film, from the montage showing everyone either going to prison or being killed, right up until the final scene with Sheeran and Brandt. In spite of the fact that this is a Scorsese gangster movie, one of the biggest draws of the film for me was the bonus of seeing what happens when the gangsters grow old and remorseful, when their power and health is stripped of them. I remember attending a talk once where the speaker mentioned that most turn towards God in the end, even the big bad wolf. The reason is that when the big bad wolf is done scaring and eating everyone, when his teeth are falling out and his vision is gone, when he's humbled and lonely, he has no one else to turn to but God. I was reminded of this when reading the ending of the Irishman script. It's really interesting seeing how all these criminals end up, how everyone in Frank's life ends up leaving him, and how he succeeds in providing excuses for himself for killing Hoffa, right up until his breakdown in the final scene. The older Sheeran parts were actually my favourite parts of the script, and I really look forward to seeing what De Niro is able to do with it. It really is a role that, if pulled off, will surely mean an Oscar nomination. It has to be remembered that all of this information is based off the earlier draft of the script, so it is subject to change and could be different in the final film. But the overall gist of it is similar to the book, and thus it's unlikely there will be anything too different. The Irishman is set to be released in late 2019 on Netflix's streaming service. Thanks for watching.